So Mary, you asked about my bar mitzvah sermon, and I didn't actually plan to include anything about that in this sermon tonight. But what I'll tell you is that my 13-year-old sense of humor thought that the best way to start my bar mitzvah Devar Torah would be to say, "Greetings and salutations." That's what I said to all my friends and family. And I made a few jokes about barbecue, barbecue food, because that's basically ritual sacrifice. That's all I could really think about. And then I shifted to talk about sacrifice more broadly. Fairly standard when you have this kind of material with 13-year-old. Not quite what I'll be talking about tonight. Next week, Jews all over the world will gather for a Shabbat that is different from all others. We'll ask, what makes this night different? Ma nishtana halayla hazeh. We'll recall and retell our story, our journey from slavery to freedom, and we'll use our Seder, our order that helps us remember how to pass down this identity as former slaves to the next generation. One might assume that the Shabbat before Passover would have a Torah reading connected somehow to the holiday, but the cycle of our Torah reading does not quite work that way. Instead of reading about plagues or the splitting of the sea, or even laws of the Pesach sacrifice, we read tonight from Parshat Tzav, which concerns the instructions for all sorts of sacrificial offerings. So in preparing for giving you a few words of Torah tonight, I really wanted to see how this portion, Tzav, might be connected to Passover. In detailing the instructions for various sacrificial offerings, the word matzah does appear a few times in the portion. But this wasn't really a substantive connection. Matzah was a sort of type of bread, just like leavened bread, and that's sort of just part of how they made lots of different sacrifices on a regular basis. Not really the same matzah as we think of for Passover. A better connection, of course, would be Moses. And Tzav gets its name from its initial words, when God instructs Moses to command Aaron, Tzav et Aharon, regarding the procedures for the sacrifices. It's unusual that God is asking Moses to command Aaron. Commanding is typically an action reserved for God. And the language suggests that Moses then has been entrusted with a godly power in commanding his brother. And while Moses is not actually mentioned in the traditional Haggadah, have we ever had a Seder without Moses coming up once or twice? I don't think so. So, together, he and Aaron spoke God's word to Pharaoh. It's not a trivial part of the story. And thinking about Moses in the beginning of our portion brought me then to a midrash, a biblical interpretation from almost 2,000 years ago that deals directly with this relationship between Moses, Aaron, and God. For our ancient rabbis, Moses' relative importance to Aaron was self-evident. God revealed all the Torah to Moses. The passage we read from Leviticus just moments ago, while unusual for ascribing the power to command to Moses, is not exceptional in its context or its content. It is one of many, many places in the Torah where God just speaks the laws to Moses, who passed them on to the people. And so it's not that surprising that our tradition came to understand Moses as greater than his brother, in a position that he could command Tzav, his brother. Yet imagine the rabbi's surprise when they encounter a verse of the Torah with God speaking to both Moses and to Aaron. And we find just such a verse back in Exodus, when God reveals the instructions concerning the Passover offering. The Midrash lays out the problem by starting to quote the verse from Exodus. It says, God spoke to Moses and to Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, it continues, are we supposed to understand that the revelation was towards Moses and Aaron? But there's direct evidence that God only speaks to Moses, not to Aaron. So the rabbis then offer a few interpretations for why the Torah says it this way about the Pesach offering. one interpretation is that God spoke to both of them in Exodus 12, chapter 12, because they were to be as equals in relation to Pharaoh. Just as Moses was a judge to Pharaoh, so was Aaron. Just as the one would speak to Pharaoh without fear and declare for the people to be free, so would the other. So this understanding views God's speech to both of them as related specifically to this moment of Passover and to the context of the Pesach sacrifice and how we remember Passover for generations to come. But another interpretation following this is even more radical and perhaps even more related to Passover. The rabbis ask, are we to understand that anything which precedes in the text is actually more important? It's a rhetorical question. In other words, they're asking, wait, are we really supposed to think that Moses is more important because he comes first in the Torah? And the answer, of course, is no. The rabbis teach, and they bring another verse where Aaron is mentioned first in the same context as a proof verse to conclude shekulin ze lazeh, meaning they are equal or balanced to one another. Moses and Aaron are actually not in a hierarchical relationship, but equal to each other. I think this conclusion extends beyond the Passover context for the rabbis, but I think it's particularly powerful in that context. Unlike our Torah portion this week, which sets Moses above his brother, commanding him, and unlike other places where God speaks only to Moses, the intention of the Passover offering and the laws of God's revealing that offering require that the law be given to both of them. Equal before Pharaoh, and shekulin ze lazeh, equal to one another. The Midrash actually extends the argument even further by using pairs of verses to show all these other relationships, not just Moses and Aaron, that are equal to each other. Heaven and earth, shekulin ze lazeh, they're equal to one another. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, equal, shekulin. Your father and your mother, shekulin, equal to one another. All of them equal to one another, and the rabbis show the biblical verses that for them prove this fact. When you think about it, this is quite amazing. An ancient text, written down nearly 2,000 years ago, suggesting that we can't say our father is more important or worth more than our mother just because that might be something that is perceived at times in our society. No, just the contrary. They are shekulin ze lazeh. They are equal to one another for the rabbis. You might even call that interpretation proto-feminist, right? An early way of understanding the equality of each person. And it stems from the revelation of the law of the Passover sacrifice. To bring a Pesach sacrifice and do so in conjunction with God's command, then we have to begin by recognizing the inherent equality and balance between Aaron and Moses, and between who normally we see a hierarchy between. We must begin by equalizing the playing field, with the reminder that no longer are we slaves, but neither can we be free until all people know the taste not only of freedom, but of equality, of being recognized for being shekulin ze lazeh, equal one to another. Whether it be categories of race, gender, sexuality, nationality, disability, any other that we can think of, the hope of our freedom and one of the meanings of it is to work towards a world in which all might come to our Seder, shekulin ze lazeh, equal to one another. At Pesach, our communal time of remembering this journey from slavery to freedom, of making our own offering in the form of a Seder, we begin then with this fundamental equality of all people, with the belief that a world that is truly free is one where all people know and taste not only freedom, but some hint of that equality. And so I'll conclude by returning to words from our Passover Haggadah. This year we are slaves, we declare. We are slaves when we do not treat each other shkulin zeh lazeh, equal and balanced to one another. And next year, may all be free. Next year, may our lives reflect the truth that all people are shkulin zeh lazeh. Keni Hiratzon, may this too be God's will.